Good afternoon. My name is Elisabeth GOSSELIN-MALO, and I am an international security and military expert. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of being joined by the National Armaments Director, Gael Diaz De Tuesta. So thank you very much for taking the time to come by and speak with us.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I guess we'll start right off with some of the questions that we prepared for you. How would you say, in your role, you manage to balance between maintaining France's strategic sovereignty in an incredibly complex and contested geopolitical world, while at the same time supporting exports abroad?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. And first, I would like to thank everyone here on the show, starting by you. It's really an honor to be here, and it's also an honor to be on this show, which is perfectly organized by the organizers, perfectly visited by a number of international and national visitors, and also we've had the pleasure of having many, many official delegations with which we have been able to communicate a lot. So thank you all for that. To answer directly your question, sovereignty has been a much used word in the past few years, and I think the concept is more simple than it appears to be. In this ever more complex world, in this ever more dangerous world, with the multiplication of crisis, rivalry, contested environment, we need some sort of diplomatic sovereignty in order to have the voice of our nation, the voice of our country being heard. To have this diplomatic sovereignty, you need strong, sovereign, independent armed forces. And the armed forces can only be strong and sovereign if they can rely on strong industry. And that's our role, is to give the role of the DGA in France, the role of the cooperation we are conducting with our partners, is precisely to provide this sovereignty. How would you do that? You can do it on your own. You can be selfish, you can be protectionist. That's one of the options. The other option is to use what we do, all of us, in everyday life, is being sovereign together. At home, if you want to buy a house with your partner, it's a two-way decision. It's a sovereign one, but taken by two people. In armaments cooperation, you can do exactly the same. You can be sovereign with a partner, either by jointly developing a product or jointly using a product where you have the same type of rights, the same type of mastering of the technology, or also what we call a mutual dependency. I depend on another country for whatever equipment, they depend on France for another sort of equipment. And with that, both models can provide to the two countries the way to be sovereign together. And again, sovereignty to me is a key word, even if it's much way too used.
And in your role, what kind of criteria come into play when dealing with arms exports abroad and more broadly with countries allied with France? Is this kind of decision, you would say, is it more complex today than maybe it was a few years ago in terms of how many factors and elements come into that decision making?
That decision-making process is incredibly robust and thorough in France and in other countries, but let me talk about the French system. So it's a joint assessment. By joint, I mean with different agencies or administrations within the French system. We have to take into account the diplomatic aspects, the military aspects, the economic aspects, and we really have a very thorough approach which allows us to make an informed decision. And that decision is really important because when we say no, we know that it has a political impact on the relationship between our country and the recipient country, but we stick to that decision because we feel it's the appropriate one. When we say yes, it's even more committing on the long term, because in France, we pride ourselves in being able to be faithful, loyal to the decision we have made. It's easy to take a decision today, given the context of the world. But when we take such a decision for an equipment that's going to be used for decades, 3-4 decades usually, you know that the initial decision is not the only one that you will have to make. You will have maintenance decisions in the long run. And so when we take an export license decision, we know that this will bind us for decades, because we want to have a continuous, if we have said yes today, we will need to say yes in 20 years' time for the maintenance aspect. And this is really the criteria that leads us to have a very robust and thorough process. Is it more complex now than a few years back? Yes and no. In France, we really know who our partners are, who our allies are. We know exactly. We know what we know who we depend on, or in which region of the world we want to exercise our influence, and we know which allies depend on us. So on the political aspect, I would say that it's not harder than some time ago. I still have a complexity which has appeared in the last few years, and that's the trend of some partners to make puzzles of capability. We are not buying pens or glasses. We are buying very complex equipment. Let me take the example of an air defense frigate, for instance. You have a hull, steel made usually. You have a CMS, combat management system. You have a radar, or maybe 2 radars actually, a long-range one and a multifunction radar. You have missiles in order to defend the frigate. You can procure them through a single source, or you can try and mix and match the capacities. You can design the hull from one provider, the CMS from another one, the radar from another one, the missile system from another one. And then you are making some sort of Frankenstein of a ship. And in the air defense sector, every second, every minute counts. And if you are losing time because of the interfaces, when you get the radar signal and it takes time to send it to the other radar, then to the CMS, then to the crew, then to the missile, you can have a non-optimized system. And if you compare that to very integrated ships, such as the ones you have in France, you are using time for technicalities which should be given to the crew for their decision. And you are endangering the crew or the ship because you have wanted to make an industrial puzzle instead of an integrated one. So I would say what is more complex now than 10 years ago is more those puzzles, more those technical aspects than the political one. So if I should have one reluctance, it would be more technical than political today.
And if we were to turn it around and speak a bit more about a project that has gotten a lot of attention, which has been coined the dronization of the French armed forces. For some people that might not know, that program seeks to invest around 5 billion euros by 2030, so over the next few years, which is a pretty big investment. Could you tell us sort of what that program will entail? And what sort of challenges maybe from an industrial and economical perspective a project of that size could involve as well?
So first of all, the evolution of warfare leads to more and more use of drones for a number of reasons. One of them is fully operational. Swarming by drones is a good way to circumvent the defenses that have been put to place historically. And also for a number of sectors, it allows to go closer to the battlefield without exposing human lives. So obviously the tendency is to go to more and more drones. If I use numbers, we probably had in the regions of tens of drones 10 years ago. We have hundreds of drones in the French armed forces today. Our aim is probably around a few thousands in the coming years. And all signals tend to show that we are going even to grow. And the current conflicts, be it in the east of Europe or elsewhere, show that this dronization of the battlefield is a reality. In terms of challenges, we are facing the same challenges as all our partners and allies. We need to mix and match mass, innovation, and high-end capabilities, which lead to a cost issue. Mass is of the essence. We have seen that in a number of conflicts, including in Ukraine. High-end is also a necessity for the future. And if you see the French programs, both in the naval sector, you could see on the French Armed Forces Pavilion the exhibition of what we call the UCOV, unmanned combat underwater vessel, or in the air sector, a UCAV, unmanned combat air vehicle. And there again, we are talking high-end equipment, probably the costs for the UCAV of a fighter aircraft. So really something we don't want to lose in an air combat, but which is going to give a strategic advantage to the French Armed Forces. So the challenge is really to mix the mass of loitering munition or small drones, the agility that you need in those sectors in order to be able to upgrade them on a weekly or monthly basis instead of yearly or even longer, as we used to do in former armament programs, and also the innovative and high-end equipment that we need for tomorrow's combat, peer-to-peer combat.
You mentioned that you are faced with some of the common challenges that other partners, other allies are also facing themselves as more and more countries are looking to drone technologies. I was curious to see if within France's dronization program, will it also address counter-drone gaps that the French armed forces might have? Because that's what the US is sort of looking into. I don't know if you're familiar with the Replicator program, which the first phase is a bit similar to what you mentioned. It seeks to field thousands of low-cost drones by next summer, and then the second phase will work with military to really address where the counter-drone gaps are. Is that something that you guys are interested in doing as well?
Yes, of course, because since the ages of war, you need a shield and a sword. So we've talked about the sword with the swarming drones or the high-end capability drones, but we also need counter drones. And that is a technology that is being developed and that relies not on one solution, but a number of solutions, what we call multi-layered or multi-sensor, multi-effector. We have tested a number of those technologies during the Olympic Games in Paris last summer, which have proven to be quite capable. And now we are in a position to industrialize the most promising solution. And to come back to the way of managing those armaments programs, usually if you look at the history of armament programs, we usually used public money in order to develop the capabilities that we needed. In the current world, with all the options around drones or counter drones, we can also directly count on the innovation and self-funded innovation from industry. And I can only encourage everyone here at the show, every company that is exhibiting or displaying their technologies here today, to provide already developed solution, not wait for the usual way of having a requirement set up by the French or other armed forces, then public money funding and development, then fielding it and qualifying it. If we are able to go faster to testing and fielding because the industry has taken the risk of investing their own money in a product, it can be really quicker for all of us.
And so is the idea essentially of the dronization program, if we can call it like that, to prioritize French systems, or is it also open to international weapon systems as well?
This comes back to the question of sovereignty we tackled earlier, and I would say both. The high-end equipment might be a bit more French, but with the whole portfolio of drones and anti-drones that we are going to develop, there is full space for cooperations. Let me give you a few examples. We have developed a mine countermeasure system with the UK a few years ago. This is still well ahead of market because that was the first two navies to shift from manned mine counter measures to unmanned ones. And that was done in full cooperation between France and the UK. So cooperation, yes. And we have a variety of opportunities to go even further. Drones are usually systems of systems where you can plug a number of sensors, effectors, platforms. And so on the MMCM, for example, you have a C2 and a number of effectors. We can envisage a cooperation where we have the Franco-British C2 with one of the drones being provided by the partnering country, or an additional drone, one that we did not think to develop or could not afford to develop or didn't have the technology to develop. If it's integrated in our C2, then we can have a mutually beneficial cooperation. So systems of systems, open architecture are two ways to plug in different options, different solutions into a similar system and to enhance its overall capability. We have other options. If you look at the UCUV I was mentioning earlier, this is actually, as of today, still a blank page. So when you have a blank page, cooperation is much easier. You can get good ideas from partners, and so it's probably the best time in order to cooperate. So my simple answer to your question would be yes, France is fully ready to cooperate on drone, as we are fully ready to support the sovereignty requirements of our partners.
And as a sort of wrapping up question, would you say that you have taken any lessons from drone warfare that we've seen in Ukraine and applied that to the kind of systems you guys are looking for through that dronization program? And if so, what would be some examples of that?
So the question is actually twofold. What we want to avoid from a strategic point of view is preparing for the current war. That is a simple answer to your question, but it's also a risk that we've been facing forever. We want to be ready for the next conflict and not be ready in 5 years for the conflict taking place now, because war will evolve. So we need to take the Ukrainian conflict into account, but we also need to think ahead and know that the next conflict would be very different. Will there be in the next conflict so much artillery shelling than we are seeing in Ukraine today? I don't know. So in the same realm, will we see the same use of drone? That is not necessarily the case. Are we going to go to a peer adversary or to hybrid warfare? Again, we don't know. So that's why we really need strategic thinking domestically, nationally, and also within our alliances. Apart from that, of course, we have taken a lot of lessons from Ukraine. That is one of the advantages of being a provider of equipment and security solutions to our Ukrainian partners, because we are also being able to benefit from their own experience, which is huge. And if I would sum up in one word, it's the agility that they have proven. We need to find ways to introduce very quickly evolutions, countermeasures to what we are seeing on the battlefield. We need to do that in days or a small number of weeks, and not in months or even years as we are doing now.
That's a theme that has come up in a lot of the discussions I've had with a number of officials throughout the week. Would you say that you guys are close to achieving that, the ability to implement those upgrades, those advancements? We're talking about drone systems, but in other equipment. I've heard some people say that, you know, as of now, at least for certain equipment, it's a matter more of months and years, and they'd like to get that down to a much lower time period. Do you think that's very difficult to do, and are you close to achieving the time frame that you would like to see?
We have a number of tools that allow us to reduce the time frame. So I would say that if needed, we could. We still have a few contractual obstacles. because of tendering processes, for instance. If you want to be able to modify your drone for, let's say, the upcoming years on a weekly basis, you have to be sure that the guy that you have chosen initially will actually deliver throughout those 2 years. And whereas when you go for a tender, you might have a claim for the guy who you have not chosen, who would have been better at the evolution, but was less good for the initial product. So contractually, we still have a number of obstacles, but we know that we have the tools, and if needed, if we were at war ourselves, I'm sure we would find the technical solutions. We already have the technical solutions to do that, as the Ukrainians are doing today.
Thank you very much. I think that's going to be all the time that we have left. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and most of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Merci beaucoup, Elisabeth.
Merci.
Thank you so much.